Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemens, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks so much for joining us for our virtual event today. It's called Back to Work, Helping the Long-Term Unemployed. This is an important issue, folks, and I hope you stay with us the whole program. We're going to be taking a look at some of the challenges currently facing older workers and ones who have been unemployed for longer than 27 weeks, the long-term unemployed. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, AARP, for its support of today's event and these really important conversations. As part of the fallout from COVID-19, older workers and the long-term unemployed are facing more than the usual stumbling blocks. The job market has evolved, new technology is being adopted at breakneck speed, and age discrimination really continues to be a factor out there. The obstacles are even greater for older workers from underserved communities. Job training funds proposed in the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill aim to support workforce development across generations. At least we hope that's the way it comes out. How should these funds be best used to help older workers and the long-term unemployed? What kind of support and reskilling efforts are needed for their successful return to the workforce? We're going to be putting these questions and more in front of our fantastic lineup of speakers. But first, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag The Hill Back to Work. It's kind of cool, The Hill Back to Work. We're broadcasting live and we'll take your questions throughout the program. As with any live stream, if it goes wonky on you, just throw it through the window. No, just push refresh the page and it should all work out. At least that's what I'm told. My first guest is Labor Secretary Marty Walsh. I'm used to seeing him as Mayor Marty Walsh, but his Secretary Marty Walsh. Prior to leading the Department of Labor, of course, he was Mayor of Boston for 7 years. Secretary Walsh, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Look, I keep wanting to say we've come through the pandemic, but honestly, we're not through the pandemic. It's still with us, and it has really hit a lot of Americans very hard. It's changed the dynamics of the social contract around labor in many ways, and I'd just love to kind of hear your priorities of working Americans. What are you working on? What's on your dashboard as very significant right now within this time of COVID?
Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be on, and also thank you for the topic. I think that oftentimes older Americans, older workers often get overlooked, and we're not looking at how do we fix the problems in our country. The beginning of last year, March of last year, the pandemic hit America, and I think that we're still living through the repercussions of what the pandemic has done to our job market. And so we have lots of work to do. So one of the things that I'm looking forward to is the Build Back Better piece of legislation that's going through Congress. There is lots of investments in there in job training and workforce development. And I think that what we're experiencing right now in our country is that as we think about job training programs, maybe in non-pandemic times, we would be looking at emerging industries, emerging technology, and how do we skill people up. Right now, what we're looking at is how do we give people the tools they need and the skills they need to be able to get a job in this market, quite honestly, particularly older Americans.
You know, so Secretary Walsh, one of the interesting things I'm interested in, because there are a lot of details in the reconciliation bill and in the infrastructure bill that we haven't all been acclimated to yet. But one of the questions I have is when it comes down to what you said, reskilling, upskilling, taking workers that have been incumbent workers at some point and giving them the skills. Is there a kind of generational inclusion frame in those bills to your knowledge?
I don't know if there's going to be a frame in the bills yet. I know the bills, it's still in the process of being negotiated, but there's definitely a frame here at the Department of Labor as we think about allocating getting these dollars out in the street, whether we get these dollars directly to states and cities, whether we get these dollars directly to programs. We have to look through that lens. There's no question about it. I think that, we think about, I get asked the question all the time, what's going on in the economy? How come people aren't going back to work? And I think there's lots of reasons for that, which we can get into if you want to. But I think ultimately what we're focused on here at the Department of Labor is how do we make sure people are prepared for the jobs that are available right now, and particularly those folks that were maybe in a career that they felt they weren't getting fulfilled, they weren't making enough money, they need more money for their retirement. We need to make sure that as we get these dollars out the front door, not just the Build Back Better dollars, but the dollars that we currently have through just regular appropriation process, that we're making an impact on.
When you were mayor in Boston, you were very popular and famous for job creation, for building diversity, out there, kind of raising the issue and I guess the opportunities of a more diverse workforce. But I think, as we talk about long-term unemployed, which is people that almost, fall out of the workforce because they get tired of, trying to stay in it. I'm just interested as a mayor, are there lessons that you had from that experience that help you now in the job you have to begin addressing those folks that are the long-term unemployed and how we successfully bring them back?
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, as mayor, you lay down a foundation to try and be, diversify the workforce and create opportunities and be inclusive. But what's different right now is it's just a continuation of being mayor. It's the sense of urgency, the sense of now that we have to act quicker. We don't have the time to lay down a foundation and 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years from now benefit from that. We're dealing with populations of people, quite honestly, that are going to need to get back to work, and they're going to want to be in a better situation in their life. I think that part of what we're seeing here with the job openings in our country is that people have had a year and a half of not working or working in their industry isn't there anymore, and they're saying we want to go back to something different. We don't want to go back to the way it was. I don't want to go back to the same old job that I had before. It either wasn't fulfilling, wasn't gratifying, or I didn't make enough money. So I think that it's the sense of urgency. So I kind of view this in some ways as a continuation of being mayor, except I'm the Secretary of Labor for the entire United States of America, and my constituency, our constituency, is every city and town in this country.
Later in this program, Mr. Secretary, we have Nancy Lamont speaking. She's going to be doing some interviews. And Nancy, as you know, is Executive Vice President of AARP. They happen to be doing this, but she's got a great line, where she says the future of retirement, I need to say, is work. And I, sort of, and I think she's right. You see more and more older Americans wanting to remain engaged, wanting to remain active. And I just sometimes feel like our system is stacked against them, that there's ageism, that there's just an infrastructure of corporate norms and work norms that are biased against older workers. And I don't know what your views are on this, but I'm just wondering, do we have to dismantle some of that? Do we need to reshape some of that? What are some of the thoughts that you have now in the Labor Department about creating a greater embrace for older Americans? Because if she's right, then we've got to find a pathway to make that work.
Well, I just want to add 2 more things to your list there. One is the constant threat of Social Security, losing Social Security, and also, I don't know if the right word, it's not deterioration, but the lack of pension plans. So when I was back as a state representative in the legislature of Massachusetts, I was concerned about someday we were going to have to set up a system, a safety net system for retirees or people wouldn't be able to retire. Nancy's absolutely right when she says work when you retire. What that means is that you don't have the 401k, you don't have your pension, you don't have enough paid into Social Security, you don't have a little bit of a nest egg so that you can retire to be able to put food on the table, pay your prescriptions. So I think that we have to do better as a country. And I think that we have to focus, and that's what I want to do here at the Department of Labor, is focus on all workers, not just the young people entering the workforce, but how do we focus on the workers that are potentially exiting the workforce, or they want to leave the workforce at some point? How do we create a pathway right now so those folks can leave the workforce? I've spent a lot of time with Nancy talking to her as, part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors or as the mayor of the city of Boston. And we've done a lot of work with AARP in the city of Boston. And really, her concerns are absolutely valid 100%. And if we don't address these concerns, there's going to be the Congress and senators are going to have constituents all across this country that are going to have seniors that are living in poverty because we didn't take care of them. We didn't set up a proper system for them to be able to succeed.
Mr. Secretary, you just mentioned the fragility of Social Security, and of course, that's an interesting topic. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, do you think that's a real danger of losing Social Security?
No, I don't think so. I think that, every 4 or 5 years there's a conversation about we're going to reframe it and realign it. But I think we just need to continue to strengthen Social Security. That is an investment that people make from their salary into the government and expecting when they retire that money will be there. So we just need to continue to strengthen Social Security, support Social Security, because that's one of the ways that people will be able to continue to retire when they retire. I mean, my father retired many, many years ago. He had his pension, he had his Social Security, he passed away. My mother got part of his pension, got his Social Security. She's able to live a good life because of that. There's too many Americans, too many older Americans in our country that don't have that ability to be able to live a good life. They're making decisions literally between prescriptions and putting food on the table.
Just lastly, Secretary Walsh, one of the other areas I'm interested in is this, what does retraining look like? When I worked in the Senate in the 1990s, I think we used to sort of fake it with trade deals. We do trade deals. Oh, we're going to have retraining assistance or something. Just didn't work. We're now, 2 decades later, and it seems like there's a lot more knowledge about how to successfully train or upskill people in effective ways now. But I'm wondering, when it comes to the elder community, you see a lot more, I guess you would call them non-traditional students in community colleges, universities. You go down all around the country and it's a bigger portion. Is that an opportunity so that as we see older Americans in colleges, in community colleges, themselves retraining, that we can somehow connect the jobs to them in ways that we haven't really done before?
No, I think that's imperative that we do that we connect older adults that are being retrained to jobs that the outcomes are a job. I think retraining or training in itself needs to have at the end of the training a job. I don't think by just making investments and talking about bringing a bunch of people in a room and training them how to do something, and then at the end of the day say, good luck, here's your certificate, go, good luck in finding a job. We can't do that right now. What we need to do is whether it's apprenticeship programs or retraining programs, we need to work better with companies. We need to better with corporations. We need to work better with opportunities so that and get connected to jobs. And one other thing I'll just say to people watching today, older Americans, don't be afraid to go back to school. When I went to Boston College evening school, I was taking class at night, and there was a woman next to me. She was my friend. She was 72 years old, getting her degree at Boston College. It's never too late to go back. It's never too late to learn new skills, because your talents are needed in America right now.
Mr. Secretary, let me ask you one slightly delicate question. I happened to see Senator Joe Manchin last night and was talking to him about this program today, about labor in West Virginia and how it could change the equation, because, of course, we know Senator Manchin's position on a lot of these bills and votes is important, as are many other senators. But he said, somehow we need to kind of look at where people are, and particularly some of the states in the country that have the lowest per capita income, and make this equation work for them. Make that labor contract, whether it's, union jobs, non-union jobs, how we kind of begin looking at that pathway. I know this is a state-specific question. There may be other states that are just like this, or regions in the country, the Appalachians, et cetera, where you have a lot of unemployment still, despite having very low unemployment in America right now. But you've got these places that are endemic. Is there some sort of way we should be looking at how we go into these communities and create training and jobs, as you said, in places that are sort of at the lower end of the spectrum right now on some of these questions?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you need to go in and talk to the companies in those areas to see what skills that their workforce needs, number one. And then if you're a governor in those states, you have an opportunity to say, listen, I have a network, a pool of people ready to go to work, and we're going to train them up. We want to attract your business to our area. As mayor of Boston, when I was there, we brought a lot of tech companies into the city of Boston in the last 5 years. And I would spend a lot of time talking to the tech companies. Is there a way for us to get some of these high school graduates, not college graduates, entry-level jobs into your companies? And they're like, absolutely. And we were trying to think about how do we create those partnerships. We did it through summer job programs first, and then we were trying to do it through apprenticeships. So there's opportunities for us right now. If you're a state like West Virginia and you have a dedicated senator like Joe Manchin, there's an opportunity to bring employers together with the Department of Labor or with the State Department of Labor and say, what type of investments do you need to educate the workers to create opportunities for people? What people want is opportunities. We have to provide them with those opportunities, but we also have to provide them with the training as we move forward. And that's why Build Back Better is so important. It needs to pass.
Well, Secretary Marty Walsh, Department of Labor, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today, and good luck with this. It's a big task, and I think it's an important one. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks for having me today.
Joining me now is Congressman Brian Stile of Wisconsin. He's a member of the Financial Services Committee and co-chair of both the Future of Work Caucus and the Middle Class Jobs Caucus. Congressman Stile, it's great to see you, and I've been reading about your work in this, kind of looking at what we do to get to broad employment, making sure that everybody out there who wants to work, that gets a job, has an opportunity to do that. I'm just interested, particularly in the Future of Work Caucus, as you're looking at, we don't often talk about technology coming on. So technology is a disruptor. A lot of people kind of look at it as zero-sum game with jobs. I look at it as a way in which sometimes new jobs are created. You can kind of enhance that. But I'm interested right now in where America sits at this moment, where there are tons of jobs not filled. There are tons of jobs available. And I'm just interested in how this is all going to reconcile in the end, and from your perspective.
It's a great question. I spent the day yesterday in Lorain, Ohio, in Representative Capter's district as the ranking member on the Select Committee for Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth. Saw firsthand some of the challenges that those communities along Lake Erie have, similar in many ways to Southeast Wisconsin. There's often a disconnect between our workforce and the jobs available. There's over 10 million jobs available across the United States, and each geographic region has different unique challenges to make sure that we're connecting workers to the jobs that are available. Often there's transportation challenges. Those are often best met at the local level. In Southeast Wisconsin, in the cities of Racine and Kenosha, many of the jobs are further inland, away from the lake, along a major interstate, Interstate 94. In areas like Lorain, we heard yesterday, where there are only 4 bus lines in the city that might need additional lines or other ways to get people connected into where the jobs are. But I think the big challenge in front of us as we look out into this year and the years ahead is really addressing that disconnect between the jobs that are available and those who are currently on the sidelines or looking to work.
I heard about this forum indirectly that Representative Marcy Kaptur was having. Are you two working together across the aisle on initiatives? What were some of the stories you heard yesterday?
So we have this is a select committee on economic disparity and fairness and growth. There's 12 members total. I'm the ranking member on the Republican side. We did a field hearing in Ms. Kaptur's district to see firsthand some of the challenges that many of our communities are facing. I'm optimistic that we can put forward policy solutions to address a lot of this. I held, obviously, many disagreements with some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle as it relates to raising taxes on our job creators, et cetera. But we are drilling in and looking for where are the answers to some of the challenges that we face. And what I think we see is similarities in districts in geographic areas all across the United States. You see restaurants that are closing early because they can't find workers. You see warehouses that are challenged to find workers to fill positions, and manufacturing companies across the United States, which are demanding workers with additional preparation, still struggling to find workers ready to come in, many times looking for individuals to make north of $20 an hour. We heard yesterday from the owner of a major U.S.-based steel company where the median wage is $102,000 a year. And this gentleman, the CEO, is expressing his struggle to find workers throughout the United States.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. I am, kind of interested, as you know, in our topic today is sort of taking a deeper dive into the questions of longer-term unemployed and elder workers and how we make sure. And I don't know how to frame it, but that ageism isn't undermining opportunities there. That as we kind of look at a future of infrastructure bill, to the degree that there is job training and upskilling, support and money, that we have generational inclusion. Where are you on that, and what has been your experience, in your district and around the country when it comes to making sure that we are taking advantage of the strengths and skills in the incumbent elder workforce?
That's a great question. I think one of the big things that we're seeing play out in the United States right now is a cultural shift. If you go back maybe 2 generations ago, most people had a much more of a linear path through life, if you will. I think of my grandfathers, my grandmas, it was go through school, education was then complete, enter the workforce, shortly thereafter begin a family, and then as you became an empty nester, exit the workforce and enter retirement. In the modern era today, as workers are coming out, it's a much more about lifelong learning. That education, work, family dynamic is in much more of a flux, which gives great opportunities for workers if the jobs will match kind of this new dynamic. And so what I think is going to be so important is that we're ingraining education and workforce development and workforce preparation throughout life to make sure that individuals are able to take advantage of jobs of the future. And as we think about the older individuals in our workforce, this is absolutely essential, that lifelong learning, that preparation continues later into life so that older individuals in our workforce are still able to take advantage of the jobs of the future. I think that this cultural shift is occurring, and what we can do from a policy perspective uniquely is make sure we're providing flexibility in the education products that are provided. For example, we could provide better flexibility in Pell Grants for individuals that want to obtain shorter-term training rather than maybe enter a four-year college in their 50s. I think that's one of the opportunities that we have in front of us.
Look, another, interesting topic I think out there. Before the COVID hit, I was down in Louisville, Kentucky, and I visited GE appliances, dishwashers and, all sorts of little gadgets we have in our house. I got to tell people it's no longer owned by GE, it's owned by Haier Corporation of China. But you kind of look at it and you go in and meet these workers that had come out of the school, all generations, but data had come in, big data. You could see how technology and software and, connectivity had really changed that workplace. And I saw workers morphing into that new world in a really constructive way. And a lot of new jobs were created. And so I am interested in this topic of future of work, how we take people where they're at, train them to deal with this. And I'm just wondering, Congressman, to what degree, I just don't find many people talking that way. But I mean, I saw it in real time down at GE Appliances, and they created thousands of more jobs in addition, as opposed to displacing the thousands, 5,000, 6,000 more jobs down there than had been there. But I'm just wondering, is that part of the conversation that we're somehow missing when we're having this discussion?
I think it's essential to be having this conversation. In particular, I think many people's mental image of what the work inside a factory is disconnected from the actual reality of what's inside the factory. I spent 10 years in the manufacturing sector before I ran for Congress. And one of the things that we did at our factory in Milton, Wisconsin, was bring people inside the factory to be able to see what are these workers doing day in and day out. And so 100 years ago, most manufacturing jobs were incredibly physically demanding. Today, some are physically demanding, but many factory jobs, as you noted, are no longer as dependent on how heavy of an item you can lift, but rather what you can do with your mind. And so what's so essential here, I think, in particular, as we have students in middle school and high school who are making career decisions, to introduce them into different lines of work, and in particular in the manufacturing sector in the United States, which is entering a higher tech level of work that I think many people fully appreciate who aren't is regularly being introduced into America's manufacturing sector.
Interesting. Congressman, we're having questions in from the audience, and we have one for you from Janet. Janet?
Hi, my name is Janet Glover-Kirkfleet, and I'm director of the Baltimore Job Hunter Support Group. Our group empowers older and or underrepresented job seekers experiencing the trauma of long-term unemployment with action-oriented strategies and supportive networks. My question is, what is the status of legislation that would give employers incentives to hire people who are long-term unemployed? Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Your thoughts, Congressman?
Yeah, I think there's going to need to be a number of tools in the toolkit, in particular for those who are long-term unemployed. We continue to see 10,000 jobs available. We still have a large number of individuals who find themselves on a long-term unemployment scale, which is challenging. I think there's going to be a number of issues that need to be brought forward on this. I think the most important thing is at the local level. We see leaders in Racine County, where I'm from in southeast Wisconsin, uniquely addressing the challenges that some of the long-term unemployed of that area face. Each geographic region seems to have slightly different and unique challenges. And in particular, how do we physically get people from their home to work? Meaning, in many urban areas, the jobs have shifted from the urban center further out into the city. If individuals don't have access to easy transportation, that puts a significant challenge for that first step back into the workforce before they get that first, second, third paycheck. And so I think we really need to be working with our local partners to address some of these challenges. But overall, we're going to have to look at tools in the toolkit where we can really jumpstart individuals at a period of time when jobs are plentiful across the United States, but not everybody is taking that up and re-entering the workforce.
Well, Congressman Brian Stile of Wisconsin, this is one of my favorite topics. I hope you'll come back. I'll tell our audience, as I understand it, you were on the Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin with 170,000 students in it. I want to talk about credentialing. I want to talk about what's going on in education, how it's connecting with the workforce. But we're going to have to do it another day. But thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your thoughts.
Thanks for having me on.
And now a message from our sponsor, AARP. Please welcome Nancy Lamond, AARP's Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer. Nancy?
Thanks, Steve. I'm Nancy Lamont, Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer at AARP. As part of our mission to empower Americans age 50 plus to choose how they live as they age, AARP is committed to supporting older workers and advocating on their behalf. Right now, that means making sure that older workers aren't left behind as the economy recovers from the pandemic. Almost half of job seekers age 55 plus have been out of work for 6 months or more, compared to around a third of their younger counterparts. Joining me to talk about the challenges facing older workers, the impact on their long-term financial security, and potential solutions are Teresa Ghilarducci, the Bernard L. and Irene Schwartz Professor of Economics at the New School for Social Research, and Jane Oates, President of Working Nation. So let's get to it. The first question goes to both of you. This isn't the first time we've seen it take longer for older Americans to find new jobs after being displaced. It happened after the Great Recession, and the pattern is being repeated today. That points to it not being anything specifically related to the pandemic. Why is it harder for older Americans who are actively looking for work to get hired? And what obstacles and challenges do they face that younger Americans do not? Let's start with Teresa.
There are a number of reasons why typically older workers are, disproportionately in the long-term unemployed. One is that employers tend to view them as more expensive, either because of their salary demands or because of their healthcare costs. Employers also tend to wrongly not understand that if they invest in older workers that they'll get any kind of return, and just basic age bias reasons. The other reason is that the older worker often has to accept a much lower pay than they had before. So there may be a little reluctance on the older workers, especially if the older workers displaced, to really go from being a welder to a home healthcare worker. So there could often be these structural problems as well.
Jane.
Nancy, I think it's just that people don't want to pay for experience. Teresa said it. Sometimes the older worker salary is the thing that turns employers off. But it's just baffling to me because every employer right now is hounding us, saying they want people with work history. They want people that can work in a team. They want people that understand work ethic. And that to me is the definition of an older worker.
Jane, you served in the Labor Department in the midst of the Great Recession. Are there specific lessons from that time related to training or supporting older workers and job seekers that you think apply especially today?
Well, I would point out one, and that's doubling down on CSEP. All older workers deserve our attention. And as we were talking about earlier, as we were waiting to start, finally, it seems like they're getting media attention. But there's nobody who needs more attention than those low-income workers who are now in their senior years. So programs like CSEP that we relied on in the Great Recession, I'm really happy to see them getting extra funding right now. And then I would add that right now we're learning that industrial workers particularly have the institutional knowledge that manufacturers and construction trades, they really need their expertise. And smart employers are starting to use them to mentor and teach younger workers as they come in. Let's hope that catches fire.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics says that there are 10.9 million job openings and 8.5 million unemployed people in the U.S. This points to this real mismatch between job seekers and the positions that employers are looking to fill. In light of that, what is the role of upskilling and reskilling programs to help the long-term unemployed get back to work? And how do we make sure that these programs are focusing on the right things and are available to people of all ages? This is for both of you, but starting with Teresa first.
Okay, yeah, but I was going to defer to Jane because I want to hear about what workforce development can do. Someone in the Obama administration told me we could solve almost every problem if the welders would become home health care workers. So we have a situation where you have a mismatch with older people that they've been embedded in their skills and their industries. And there is wildly different projections of employment in different sectors and in others. So that always calls, labor economists would say, training, activist employment policies that we don't even conceive of in this country, where other countries anticipate sectorial changes, anticipate that older people will have a harder time making the match, and just embed it into their system. They don't have unemployment insurance. They have sort of training while you're working. There is also this issue about patriarchal roles and racial and gender stratification. Welders aren't women, and personal home healthcare workers, we're adding 1 million of those jobs to the economy in the next year, are women. So we have to get by a lot of other barriers, besides skill. But a country that anticipates these sectorial changes and anticipates displacement and recessions could do it. So we have to put on the agenda activist labor policies. Yeah. I have some ideas for that.
Jane?
Yeah, I mean, look, Nancy, this is a perplexing economic situation. The new JOLTS report today says that the number of hires is down. I mean, how can we have all these jobs opening and employers aren't hiring? So I would point to some things that I think definitely, and love Teresa's ideas on this as well. I think the sorting software that HR professionals are using now absolutely works against the long-term unemployed, but I think it also works very specifically against older workers. And we should be calling on employers to stop using that. If there is a shortage, let human beings figure out who the best talent is without looking for buzzwords. And then secondly, I would say that training programs were not built for older workers. They don't recognize their work history. They don't recognize all the things they've learned beyond their academic credentials. So I think we have to really encourage training programs to have an accelerated path for those with a strong work history and accelerate them through, maybe giving them the digital skills or the specific sectoral skills they need for in-demand jobs, but certainly not starting them at square one.
Well, thank you for those specifics. Teresa, your latest report on older workers says that since January 2020, the size of the retired population in the U.S. expanded beyond its normal trend by an additional 1.7 million people. Do you think these retirements are permanent? And if they are, what are the long-term financial implications for someone in their 50s or 60s who's out of the workforce for an extended amount of time, or who retired much earlier than planned?
Right. There are, we usually expect people to withdraw from the labor market during recessions, but this one was much higher than trend. There was also another difference between just about the people who did retire in this recession. Much more likely for older workers without a college degree. And the people who are older with a college degree were more likely to be able to work from home and were not pushed out. And that means going forward, the way you asked the question was perfect. What this means going forward is what I call a tale of two retirements. So for the first time, I'm seeing a real split between the people without a college degree being much more likely to be involuntarily retired. I mean, there's something wrong with that word when we examine the labor statistics, because retired sounds like it's the agency of the worker. But if you probe, you found out that the agent is the employer or their health. It wasn't just a choice to work or retire. So people without college educations are much more likely to retire way earlier than they planned, before they are eligible for Medicare and before they're eligible for even early Social Security. This means that they'll be more in debt based on our projections and the kind of wealth holdings of what people have now, more in debt when they reach 62, 65. They will have drawn down their retirement savings. They wouldn't have built up the retirement savings as much as they had. And they will have some labor market scarring, meaning the longer you're out of the labor force, the harder it is to get back in. So I suspect that they'll just be living at lower living standards than people who are able to stay in the market during this period of time. I recognize how I sound. It's kind of a bummer. So we'll get to policies that will help fix this. But if we don't do anything, we will have this severe inequality and well-being among the elderly in 5-10 years.
Well, thank you both so much for joining today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to remember that a tale of two retirements. This is very big issues we're dealing with. Now time to hear from our panel of experts. Amanda Cage is the president and CEO of the National Fund for Workforce Solutions, an organization working to promote an equitable future for workers, employers, and communities. Richard Johnson is director of retirement policy at the Urban Institute. I love the Urban Institute. And Susan Hausman is a labor economist and vice president director of research at the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. Welcome to you all. But this time, I've got a question from the audience from Michelle that I'm going to start with because I think it gets right at the core of something. So let's listen to Michelle for a moment.
Hi, I'm Michelle Fay. I'm founder of a financial planning firm here in Seattle, Washington. And my question is, what ideas are being pursued to help older workers confront ageism? We're in an era in which the discussion of diversity includes many marginalized groups, but not usually older people. Thanks.
Amanda, I want to start with you because I think it's, goes right to a point about we have all these jobs open, we've got all this talent, we've got a lot of folks that want to work, as I understand it, but there is this stigma thing out there. If you're an older worker, you don't get the same treatment across the board, I feel. But what's your view, Amanda?
Yeah, I think there's just straight up old school discrimination. We see that a lot with other types of workers, with people of color, where employers are reluctant to hire them because of discriminatory practices. I would say the other thing that really matters, though, are all of the practices that employers engage in that don't seem discriminatory on their face value, but really do have a disparate impact on older workers. So, for example, many of the older workers who are long-term unemployed, they had stable careers, right? And so they were really victims of economic shocks beyond their control. But the process for applying for jobs has really changed. Mature workers that experienced layoffs find often that they don't have the educational qualifications for similar jobs that they had earlier, and that those jobs pay less. We know, like Jane said, there's screening software designed to weed them out. Employers use employment gaps in history all the time to disqualify candidates. We know employers insist on credit checks for older workers who may have had some real financial hardship because of their unemployment. And then, we have this lack of people communication. People put their resumes into sort of this black box and they never hear back from people. Yeah. And so there's all these other ways that that older workers really feel the impacts of discrimination.
Fascinating. Richard, I know this is a research area of yours. You've actually written on this subject. Would love to get your take on it. And along, talking about ageism in America, what do we do to dismantle it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I agree with the other speakers that this is a problem. It is pervasive, and we know, for example, that it takes older workers much longer to become reemployed than younger workers after they lose their job. When they do become reemployed, they suffer larger wage losses than younger people. So I think there's little doubt that that age discrimination is pervasive. Ageism is probably the one discriminatory behavior that is not really as frowned upon as other things, other types of discrimination in the country. At least in Polite Company now, we don't speak disparagingly of certain groups. We know we shouldn't do that. And with older people, it's perfectly fine to mock someone for their somewhat advanced age. And when we think about policies and what policies are there to address that, what we've seen recently is actually making it more difficult to confront ageism than it was in the past. So the Age Discrimination and Employment Act outlaws discriminatory behavior in the labor market. And yet we saw a 2009 Supreme Court decision which made it more difficult to prove age discrimination, that you had to show that if not for age discrimination, you would have a job, you would have higher pay, you would have some other, you would be enjoying some other benefit. That wasn't the way the Age Discrimination in Employment Act was interpreted before 2009, and there is some legislation moving through Congress that would revert to this other standard, to this easier standard, which says that you merely need to demonstrate that age discrimination is a factor in your in this negative outcome. So that's something that might offer some hope, but it's. I would have thought the changing demographics would have made it easier. Now about 25% of the workforce is age 55 and older, and yet we see age discrimination getting worse, even as the workforce becomes older, not better.
Fast. I mean, it's depressing, but I mean, you seem to have a good realist take on it. Susan Hausman, I'm interested in this report as well, and your thoughts on this, but you've written this report, as I understand it, Policies to Improve Workforce Services for Older Americans, suggesting 7 relatively low-cost reforms that can address this subject. And I'm just interested in, one, your view on the on our questioner's question about ageism, but 2, the kind of playbook on how to reverse it, which is what I think. I haven't read your report. I'm going to go get it, but I'd be interested in your insights on this.
Let me try to give a bit of a synopsis, but let me pick up first on something that Richard said, and how do you address ageism? I think that typically we think we'll pass a law and make it again illegal to discriminate. And those laws, I used to, many years ago, taught public policy to graduate students, and it's extremely difficult to enforce those laws. It always was, and it still is, especially in the hiring process. So where do we go from here? I mean, one general approach one might think about is just helping to slowly change attitudes towards older workers. I'm going to point out a program actually being piloted in Michigan by the sponsor of this, AARP, this session, which is, I believe it's called Experience for Hire. What does it do? It really tries to tackle both inhibitions of that older workers have in going into the job market and looking for jobs, because in part because of ageism, they're tired of being turned down, or they may not know how to apply for jobs when they lose one, or going back in after some extended period of time. But also, the ageism of employers. And what are they doing? They're getting workers, and then trying to really reach out to employers who might be potentially interested in hiring them, selling them, and then it is basically it's run through job centers and matching employers with workers, and it is a job fair specifically for older workers. This could be one approach, but more broadly, there are things that could be done through our workforce services programs that could facilitate, that could help provide older workers with better services. One is to provide dedicated staff who are used to working with older workers and can help make those connections with local employers. Another is training that's been mentioned. It's by Teresa and others that older workers can be retrained. Oftentimes, the impediment to a job may be a lack of skill, and it's been shown that they can easily pick up basic technical skills that are demanded in new sorts of jobs. A third thing that I'll mention is all of our conversation so far has focused on getting jobs with employers. But actually, if you look at older workers, the rate of self-employment, or I'll just call it non-employees, they may be, traditional workers, traditional self-employed, owning a business, but also independent contractors skyrockets as people get older. In fact, if we think about the difference between the gap between employment rates of more educated workers, that is the college educated and the less educated, over time, it is largely explained when people are younger by differences in rates with traditional W-2 jobs. As they age, it is increasingly explained by a difference in their ability to get self-employed or independent contractor work. There are a lot of impediments that we lay out in this report, in this Brookings report, to promoting self-employment and to helping workers get into self-employed jobs in the workforce systems that should be dealt with, removed to some degree.
Right. Well, I'm sorry.
No, I was also going to just very quickly say that self-employment or independent contractor work is on many dimensions often for older workers attractive to the degree that it gives them greater flexibility.
Really appreciate that overview, and I want to direct people to this report again, Policies to Improve Workforce Services for Older Americans. I just have a link here, so Google it and find it. It's a, I'm sure, a fascinating playbook. But let me go back to Amanda for a minute. Amanda, the National Fund for Workforce Solutions, which is out there trying to sort of look at the resources you've been tweeting to tell Congress to invest in workforce equity and skills training. This is my big question, right? We know that upskilling of Americans is vital, right? It's part of what we need to do. I can tell you that at least 10, 15 years ago, we were saying the same thing, but if you went to, to try to retrain from being in one industry to, say, trying to become a nurse or trying to, go into a different profession, the costs were exorbitant. And I don't know, I mean, we talk just sort of the free market will take care of this. Are we doing enough to give people the resources to invest in retraining? What does that picture look like? Because I want to make sure that we're not leaving out the real person, trying to retrack their lives, getting the resources. What does that world look like, and how are you helping?
Yeah, so, we often talk about reskilling and upskilling, and I want to shift the conversation a little to the supports that people need. Right. When we talk about long-term unemployed, we tend to underestimate the emotional toll of that unemployment. It's a very traumatic event. It's akin to like losing a loved one. And so by the time somebody has come into a situation where they're told they need to reskill, they've exhausted all their unemployment benefits, they've burned through their savings. Many of them for the first time ever are contemplating assistance to cover their basic needs. And while that's all going on, their confidence is just withering, and they're being told to sell themselves to potential employers and to make sure that they upskill. And I think the programs, in addition to skilling, and skilling is really important, we need to be able to address the supports people need to be successful. And some of those include things like intensive career coaching, right? Many people are making big changes in their occupation or the industries that they're familiar with. Support groups, and I can't underestimate this, being with other people who are in your situation, like job clubs, really important. As people go through training, cohort models where they're sitting shoulder to shoulder with other folks who are, again, learning something new. Oftentimes, earn and learn models where you're already placed with an employer, so that fear of not having a job is gone. You have a job. You get to learn on the job. These are the things that I think will really be important to helping people be successful, in addition to, again, that hard skill training that everybody knows is important.
Well, thank you. We're getting close to the end here, and unfortunately, because I'd love to keep talking about this, but Richard, I'm a big believer in show and tell. I know the Urban Institute is sort of like this, and maybe Upjohn too, I don't know, but these massive centers of data and experience, and you'd be the perfect place for show and tells. I'm interested in who's getting this right. I've talked a lot to Mayor Francis Suarez of Miami, and I know that elder workers are on his radar screen of what he cares about, like trying to generate intergenerational everything in Miami. I don't know about other places and their apertures for this sort of discussion, and where you. So I'd just love to hear both from you and Susan real fast. Are there models out there you think are working that we can show off and try to replicate, or do you think it's just a mess everywhere?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the outcomes are not very encouraging anywhere. I will say, though, that, we're talking about training. What's really important, and when training is effective, it's when you have a close partnership with employers, so that you make sure that older workers of any age, but I think particularly older workers, are training for a job that is in demand, that employers are hiring for. And so having that partnership with employers is important. Also, partnerships with community colleges can be important. We underinvest in worker training throughout the economy. It is really shameful how little we invest in that. And I think we need to invest more in older workers as well, because as has been said repeatedly now, older workers can learn. They want to pick up new skills. My research, I find that 50% of workers change occupations after age 50. So let's make it easier for that to happen.
Thank you. Susan, any quick models out there you think work? Are you as cynical as Richard?
Let me just say that we're maybe I'm optimistic, but the policy brief that you mentioned was actually, I got a lot of input from our workforce services division. Briefly, the Upjohn Institute has traditional policy researchers like myself. Head the research division, but somewhat uniquely, our institute runs WIOA programs in our part of Southwest Michigan. We got, in writing that policy brief, got a lot of input from our workforce services staff.
Right.
And some of that, and that has been recommended by us, my co-author Catherine Abraham and I, but by others as well, to get specialized services dedicated to older workers, is in proposed legislation by Marie Newman in WIOA reauthorization, and they're very excited about the possibilities of implementing these things.
Well, look, I really appreciate the candor each of you have brought to this. I know it is a very, very important topic. I've been reading some of Richard Johnson's work, and I think it's so important, and I look forward to reading the work of all of you. But I really think ageism and the kind of structural barriers to getting to fuller employment, which I'm about to discuss with the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, this exact same subject from a different perspective. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us. Amanda Cage, President and CEO of the National Fund for Workforce Solutions. Richard Johnson, Director of Retirement Institute at the Urban Institute. You should really look at the Urban Institute site. Susan Hausman, Vice President and Director of Research at the Upjohn Institute for Employment Research. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My final guest is Raphael Bostic, the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. One of the economic goals of the Federal Reserve is achieving maximum employment. We're going to dive into the tools the Fed has at its disposal to achieve that. And I'm just going to tell you, it's really well worth going to the website of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta or other Federal Reserves, because they have R&D centers. They've got reports they put out on all of this stuff. And it's really, really fast. President Bostic, it's really great to be with you today. And I know that one of your interests, as we discuss maximum employment, is shaking up what that definition is a little bit. Tell us what you think about maximum employment.
Well, I talked about this. Well, first of all, Steve, very good to see you, and it's really good to be here. And thank you for the plug on our website. So I think we have great stuff on, and we do wonderful things that are really for the public to use. When I think about maximum employment, I talked about this in a speech over the summer, and I'm really trying to emphasize that there is actually a different way to think about maximum employment that I call a longer-term maximum employment that we achieve when anyone who wants to have a job finds one, and that job actually matches their productive potential. And it's really different than the notion of a shorter run concept where you just take people where they are and try to get them employed. And the longer run approach really says we can invest in people, we can get them to have a different set of skills, and then really tailor them to really be competitive for the new jobs that are going to emerge. And this takes us directly to the notion of people who are in longer term unemployment, because many of them, when they lost their jobs, they lost jobs that aren't going to come back. And the new jobs require a different set of skills. So if we're going to get them off the sidelines and get them into working, we're going to have to invest in them. We're going to have to invest to make sure they have the skills that are going to make them competitive for those jobs. And that's really where our bank has spent a lot of time. We have a lot of work that we're doing right now to try to see and promote the things that might be effective in getting people off the sidelines and into these new jobs. Because it's something that's really important for us.
Look, I'm not sure I'm going to get this question right, whether I'm going to articulate it well enough. But, listening to the last panel, and you listen to Richard Johnson, who at the microeconomic level is kind of looking at, biases and ageism and structural barriers. And I'm just wondering what the gap is, what your tools are at a kind of, and I assume it's sort of a macroeconomic level versus microeconomic realities. Does that make sense? Is there, how do we take the big framing of, that large, feds do and make that sort of worker promoting, if you will, or maximum employment promoting versus some of the norms and concerns that our last panel had at the micro level?
Well, I actually think there are two things to say here. First, this isn't a micro or macro. It's actually both. And if you look at the things that we're doing at our bank, we're really trying to take our macro level analysis and really distill it down into county level assessments and metro area level information sets so that people can understand that there are things that are out there that can make a difference. The other thing I would say, though, is that I do think even if you acknowledge that there's a lot of diversity across this country in terms of communities, there are a couple of challenges that seem to be consistent across the board. One, I think, is information. And we have seen time and time again that the people who want to have work are often not aware of where there are new opportunities that they might pursue to try to get employed. And also, they don't often know what skills there are that they have to have in order to do those skills. So that informational piece is really, really important. And we're really trying hard to get some tools and some data tools available to people on our website. We have an Opportunity Occupations Monitor, for example, and we have a Connections Insight model, our monitor, that also does the same thing. But it says, if you live in, say, Des Moines, Iowa, and you're looking for work, you go to one of our tools, we'll tell you where there are vacancies. We'll tell you in that second monitor I mentioned, we'll tell you kind of what the skills you need, and we'll also tell you what programs there are that are locally available to provide those skills. So that information plays such an important role. And then we turn to the skills development, which has been the focus of so much of today's discussion.
One of the things that came up as well earlier, I was sort of interested in it. We didn't go deep enough in the time we had, but I'm just sort of wondering whether we need a kind of credentialing or set of stackable credentials, if you will, that recognizes the experience that elder workers have, but also gives them an opportunity to walk into a place and then make themselves qualify for new skilling. Because one part of this discussion is being driven by what may come in this infrastructure bill, what may come in this reconciliation bill. Is there going to be support out there for intergenerational upskilling and worker training and workforce development? I'd just be interested in your experience in Atlanta, whether you have anything with regards to workforce development, including elder workers or long-term unemployed workers in that, and what the challenges are there.
Well, Steve, I think you really highlighted a very important point, which is that older workers and, in a general sense, workers that have been in the workforce for a long time, it may now be out for a long time, they have experience. And that experience has allowed them to get skills that we may not need to emphasize so much in the job training programs that they might be drawn to or participate in. And it really does call for and points to the need to do some kind of upfront skills assessment so we can really tailor our programs and meet the people who are looking for jobs where they are and spend most of our time getting them the things that they actually need. And for us in Atlanta, we really do focus on this a lot. We are really working hard with the training infrastructure, the infrastructure that provides skills to get them to think hard about, like, how do you most effectively and efficiently use the resources that you have so you can get your the prospective workers into the programs and then out as quickly as possible so they can start earning money and supporting their families.
One of the other characteristics of this time is we see during the pandemic lots of open jobs, particularly in service sector. Even in the gig economy, if you're going to get there, it's just not populated as much. And there's a lot of debate and discussion. Is it because people want a different quality of life? Do they want to earn more? Is it because of the complications of childcare and the responsibilities there that are an offset? I'd just be interested if you've done any research or have any insights into that gap that we're seeing today and whether you think it will close at some point.
Well, Steve, you ask a very good question, and it's actually a very hard question. And then you noted there's so much debate on this. I would say that our research group has focused on this. We have a paper that shows that almost a quarter of the unexplained gap in worker returns to the labor force are associated with women with children that are younger than 6 years old. And to me, that really says this is not about income. It may not even be about skills. It's about how do you manage a family in an environment when the support systems are somewhat uncertain and are very volatile. So you can't take a job, then have your kid be sent home from kindergarten, have to quit that job to take care of the child. So I think there are a lot of people that are sitting on the sidelines really trying to just figure out what the new steady state is going to look like. And then we can start to see them make decisions as to where they're going to go. I actually remain fairly optimistic. I think that most Americans actually want to work, but they want to do it in a way that makes sense for their families and is going to not lead them to have extra stress about what's going to happen to family members. So I'm hopeful that as we get further past this pandemic, as vaccines get more and more to the population, as we find and become comfortable with managing that, a lot of the fear that has really characterize our economy and our consumers will go away. People won't be afraid to go to work, and we'll see a lot of that return happen in the coming months.
Well, sadly, we're at the end. I could really talk to you all day. You may not want to talk to me all day, but I really enjoy our conversations, and I want to just, salute, your research team, because I really do enjoy your reports. After I've talked with some of your folks, I went in and looked at it. I just tell the audience, you can really learn a lot, better than the New York Times, better than The Hill even. But I want to thank you so much for talking with The Hill. Thank you, Raphael Bostic, the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Really appreciated your comments.
Well, thank you, Steve, and we should talk to you more often. You should come on down to Atlanta when you get a chance, and I'll host a meeting where you can meet with all of our research folks.
You have a deal. You have a deal on that. Thank you, sir. That brings us to the end of our program today. A very big thank you to AARP for its support and all of you attendees for joining us for this discussion today. For any of you who missed the conversations, we'll have the video up from the event on our website shortly. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.